Now, the captivating duality of inertia and sensuality touch upon the essential aspects of women's lives in India. The swing. The delineation of the female presence was to reach a dual complexity. The simplicity of form would enshroud a metaphorical and psychological richness. Here we see the thighs of the young girl are wedged between the seat, the bare foot resting on the wooden clog protruding below, and the red of her clothes is picked up by the blossoms in the trees behind her as she mounts the swing. The playful act of swinging is heightened by the eroticization and the truncated frustration of the woman evident in her body language. Amrita now wanted to engage with a wider canvas which would reflect life as it is lived by ordinary people, particularly the women in India. Her involvement with the structure of the painting drew her increasingly towards the miniature tradition and to the denotation of figures as a minute component of a wider scheme of things. Resting. A woman sorting leaves along with her fellow workers, with the soft light falling on her form, is a subject of exquisite grace. A vivacious description of women's activities forms a rhythmic pattern over the canvas in the village scene. Influenced by Pahari miniatures, we see the women engage in their daily chores, and there is a swaying hymn from one side to another. Their faces are in darkness, but their body language clearly marks them out as individuals, separate and distinctive. In village scene, Amrita uses white, nuanced in different ways, to spellbinding effect. An exceptional use of white always marked out Amrita's paintings. She had discovered that white, if used effectively, could enliven a painting, like a flash of lightning which would illuminate the entire space. A whole gamut of activity takes place simultaneously in the lady's enclosure. Far from being seductive, the woman dressing herself is imbued with the grace of intimate domestic routine. The feminine figures in her work are always laced with a sadness, which had to do with the difficulties of her own life, as well as the desolation she sensed in the life of women. In a work like the potato peeler, for instance, which she made in Hungary when she returned to marry her first cousin, we see the desolation of a peasant woman. Once again, we see that her eyes are not painted, almost as if to universalize her form. There's the same effect in the lady's enclosure. The eyes are not painted. And we see a similarity in the bent head and the desolation, which has to do with the truncated fullness of her life, the fullness she could have achieved. But primarily, Amrita's fascination with the Mughal miniatures began to emerge, for their subtle yet intense keenness of form, acute and detached observation. Red Veranda. For the elephant promenade, she had the entire scene enacted with elephants and mahouts against the wall and dome of the Majitia estate at Saraya to give her what she felt would look like a Mughal miniature. So she actually had these elephants placed with the mahouts, and she made them stand and she painted it. She was able to achieve the interweaving of man, animal, and landscape while drawing out their essential aspects. In her overview of the subject, she was able to draw upon the essential aspects of their lives while grouping them together. Amrita had experimented with the figure in landscape earlier while in Hungary and had made a masterly Bruegel-esque painting in which an animated market scene is highlighted by a white church steeple at the back. Hungarian market scene. The wizened old man at the center of the painting in repose, and as a counterpoint to the frenzied activity around him, is echoed by another painting made in India, The Ancient Storyteller. An exceptional work where the landscape is included as a thematic necessity. She is moving towards more rooted work where the characteristics of the environment are drawn in. The white of the mansion, soothing as well as dazzling, with its impenetrable feudal existence inside, interfaces with artisanal practices that continue to exist outside. The venerable old man with his raised hand relates timeless tales while the woman pounds grain in an earthen pot. The painting speaks of cyclical rhythms. In this compressed work, man, animal, and nature are situated as part of a wider scheme of things. And somehow, with this work, we feel that her stint in the countryside in Saraya is coming to a close, and she and her husband decide to move to Lahore, which was a very vibrant city then. By September 1941, Amrita and Victor had reached Lahore to set up home, and after much hunting, they finally rented a place near the mall, then the fashionable part of Lahore. At apartment 23 in Sir Gangaram Mansion, also known as Exchange Mansion, which was occupied mostly by professionals, Victor had his clinic on the ground floor. The living rooms were on the first floor, and the Barsati on top was Amrita's studio. I was in Lahore a few weeks ago, and this house still stands exactly like this. The pair enthusiastically set about doing up the place, at last a home they could call their own. Visitors caught Amrita and Victor in dungarees, polishing the floor or painting the doors and windows. They furnished it tastefully, hiring some tables and chairs and hanging some of her paintings on the walls, although most were still in Shimla. Victor fitted up his clinic with the appropriate equipment, and they even managed to acquire a small Ford car. Some of India's legendary writers, artists, and intellectuals lived in Lahore in the 1930s and 40s, and they began to congregate at their place. The writer, the late Kushwant Singh, held a fortnightly soiree at his residence there, with writers and poets like Faiz, Ahmad Shah Bukhari, Gurbaksh Singh, Kartar Singh Duggal, Amrita Pritam, Mangat Rai, G.D. Khosla, and many others. Amrita knew most of them, including the legendary A.S. Bukhari, then the Director General of All India Radio and an extremely vibrant person. Lahore's artistic community included Abdul Rahman Chugtai, B.C. Sanyal, Bevan Petwan, Roop and Mary Krishna, and the young Krishan Khanna and Satish Gujral. Amrita began to enjoy life to the hilt. By this time, she had decided to have an exhibition in December, and it was to be held at the Punjab Literary League Hall above Lorang's Cafe, run by a Swiss in the Charing Cross area. But suddenly, on December 3rd, she took ill. And she passed away in the midnight of December 5th. The cause of her death remains unknown, but a close friend, Iqbal Singh, who later wrote a book on her, was present in the last few hours and mentions that she kept talking of colors. He quotes her husband, Victor. She kept mumbling about colors, blues, reds and greens and violets, all sorts of colors. Unconsciously or subconsciously, she was still thinking about colors and light and shade. Then she went into a deep coma. The exhibition was held posthumously at the Punjab Literary League Gallery on December 21st, 1941. And we see in the foreground her husband, Victor, with visitors. Colors is what Amrita's last painting is about, a mass of deep green foliage, facades of red and yellow buildings in the distance, indicated as color planes rather than as mass, which bring in a move towards abstraction. It was a view from the window of her studio in Lahore. A woman drying cow dung cakes on the terrace, the buffaloes perched on the road, bring in the pastoral aspects of an urban city in India. But it was also the transportation of the feudal world she had known into the culture of a vibrant cosmopolitan city, which was the reality of a new emerging society. While delineating form, the leaping red color at the back is like a tongue of flame emblazoning a new trail of imagination. The painting, abruptly terminated by her sudden death at the age of 28, is a marker for an important breakthrough Amrita was about to make. But her legacy continues to influence generations of artists, making her words into a truism. Europe belongs to Picasso, Matisse, and Braque, and many others. India belongs only to me. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I would like to ask this gentleman sitting in the second row, because you came up to me just before I began the lecture and you said you knew the husband and you had worked in the families or were part of the family estate. So what was that like?
Dr. Egan was very much part of the family. He used to live where Amrita used to paint was the main house, kind of a palace called the Badi Koti. And later on, they built their own house, that is Dr. Egan and Amrita. And he was the only doctor. And I didn't know, I think I met him once or so. But I got to know his compounder, a chap called Tara Singh, who learned all his medicine, and he was treating everyone in this whole town of Sardar Nagar. And he used to say that Egan was the most fantastic chap, taught him all the medicine that he knew. The Majitias loved Egan, and he stayed there and worked there till Uncle Egan was an icon, so till the end. I was told that the room in which I used to stay was the room in which Amrita had done a lot of her paintings.
Oh.
So there was a lot of atmosphere in this whole place. And the first time that I saw a painting of hers was when I was I think I was about 14 or 15 years old. And my father, who was a director in Dunlop's, they had brought out a calendar. I think it was an Air